All right. So today we are going to do a deep dive into something that can seriously impact an IB economics student's grade.
Absolutely.
The internal assessment.
Yeah, the I.
Big deal. It's worth a pretty big chunk of your final grade.
Yeah, it is.
And today we're going to be taking a look at all sorts of resources. We've got examiner feedback. We've got teacher guides.
Okay.
Even some advice from YouTube.
Ooh.
All to help you guys out there nail this thing.
What I find interesting is this is not like your average exam.
Yeah.
Where you're just kind of memorizing and spitting out facts and figures.
Right.
You have to think like an economist.
Yeah.
You have to take economic theory and look at what's going on in the real world.
Exactly. And for those of you who haven't done an IA yet,
Mm-hmm.
it's a portfolio of 3 commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
Each one is based on a recent economic news article.
Got it.
So one is going to be microeconomics,
Okay.
one macroeconomics,
Great.
and one global economics.
So you're applying what you've learned to the real world, and you got to show them you can think like an economist.
Yeah, and choosing that article is like the first big hurdle.
Yeah.
You need an article that's interesting,
Right.
that's engaging,
Yeah.
that has a lot of data,
Absolutely.
and that presents, clear economic events to analyze.
Yeah, and I read this thing about how some students are avoiding articles from like The Economist or the Financial Times
Oh, really?
because the analysis is already there for them.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But that's not what you're supposed to be doing.
right.
They want to see you do the analysis.
Yeah, you're not supposed to repeat what other people have said.
Exactly. And, if you listen to what we're talking about today in this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully you can avoid those like late night IA panic sessions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because it's like, we're giving you all the secrets.
Yeah, it's like a cheat sheet for success.
Exactly.
Okay,
Great.
let's say we've got our article.
All right.
What's next?
So each commentary needs to focus on a different key economic concept.
Okay.
So we're talking things like scarcity,
Right.
choice,
Mhm.
efficiency, government intervention, all that good stuff.
Okay, so it's not enough to just have like a vague understanding of the concept. You need to be able to apply it
Yeah.
to your specific article.
And the examiners were very clear about this.
Okay.
You can't use the same concept twice.
Right.
So if you do scarcity for micro,
Yeah.
you got to pick something else for macro and global.
Yeah. Makes sense. You got to show them, a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely.
Now, diagrams, I feel like we see this everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Diagrams are essential.
Absolutely essential.
They really want to see those diagrams.
They want to see that you can take what's in your head
Yeah.
and translate that into a visual.
It's like showing your work
Exactly.
in math class.
Right.
Like, you can't just give them the answer.
You got to show them how you got there.
Right.
And one thing that the examiners emphasized was hand-drawn diagrams. So that shows that it really is coming from you.
Oh, so you can't just like download a generic diagram?
Nope. They don't want to see that.
Okay. And those generic diagrams,
Yeah.
they don't have specific labels?
Exactly. So like instead of just saying price,
Mm-hmm.
put the price of whatever it is.
Okay.
Price of gas per liter.
Yeah, so make it relevant
Yeah.
to the article.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about how we're actually writing this commentary,
Mhm.
using the right language.
Yes.
We want to sound smart,
Of course.
but we don't want to like overwhelm the reader.
Right. So how do we find that balance?
Yeah. How do we do that?
You've got to pick a few key terms that are relevant to your analysis.
Okay,
And then you got to define them in a way that shows, what they mean.
gotcha. So don't just use big words to sound fancy.
Exactly.
Use the ones that really matter.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us into the next important part, which is the application and analysis.
Okay.
You don't want to just repeat what the article is saying.
Yeah.
You got to take that article and you got to weave in quotes.
Okay.
You got to bring in those details and show how they actually illustrate the economic concepts you're talking about.
Oh, so you're basically building a case.
Yeah.
Look.
You're saying, here's the theory. Here's how this article proves it.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's where having a data-rich article
Absolutely.
is so important. It
Yeah.
gives you something to work with.
Exactly.
Now, the next part,
Mm-hmm.
this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
It's the evaluation.
Oh, yeah.
So we've explained everything,
Mm-hmm.
but now we've got to make some judgments.
Right.
What kind of judgments are we talking about?
So you might want to think about who is this helping and who is this hurting?
Oh, so like different stakeholders.
Exactly.
Okay.
You could also talk about the short-term and the long-term effects.
Right. Because sometimes something's good in the short term,
Right.
but bad in the long term,
Or vice versa.
or vice versa.
One of the teacher guides had a really interesting point. They said you should question the assumptions of the economic theory.
That's really interesting.
Right. So don't just accept the theory as fact.
Right.
Think about, are there limits to this theory?
Does it really apply here?
Exactly.
Okay, so before we move on, I think we need to address the elephant in the room,
Oh, okay.
the word count.
Ah, yes. 800 words.
It's a hard limit,
Hard limit.
and I know from experience that it can be really constricting.
And I've heard horror stories about examiners. Like, if it goes over, they just stop reading.
Oh, wow.
I saw a YouTube video that had a great tip.
Okay.
Don't overquote the article
Oh, that's good.
because they can read the article.
Yeah.
So use your words to analyze.
Use your words wisely.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right.
So we've talked about, the overall picture,
Yeah.
but let's dive a little deeper into how these commentaries are actually assessed.
All right, let's break it down.
Yeah, because understanding those criteria
Mm-hmm.
is going to help you get the best possible grade. Okay, so let's do it.
Okay.
So we've got all these different criteria that the examiners are going to be looking at.
Right. So let's start with diagrams.
Good.
3 marks right off the bat.
That's a lot.
It is. So you want to make sure your diagrams are clear. They're hand-drawn, and they really show that you understand how those economic concepts are working in the context of your article.
Right, so no copying and pasting for the textbook.
No, they don't want to see that.
You got to apply it.
Yeah. And don't forget about those specific labels we talked about.
Right, like instead of just quantity,
Exactly.
it should be like quantity of electric vehicles.
If that's what your article's about.
Right, got
Yeah.
to be specific.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about terminology?
2 marks for this one.
Oh.
And it's all about, using the right language.
Okay.
Showing that you understand those economic terms.
But do we need to define every single word?
No. Don't turn your commentary into a dictionary.
Okay, yeah.
Just pick a few key terms.
The ones that are really important.
The ones that are central to your analysis.
Got it.
And then explain them in a way that shows you really get how they apply to this specific situation.
So quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the big one, application and analysis.
3 marks?
This is where we really get to show what we know.
Exactly. And this is where having that data-rich article comes in handy.
Right, all those details.
Yeah, you can really dig in and analyze.
It's like being a detective.
I like that.
You're putting the pieces together.
You got to take those quotes, the specific examples, and weave them into your analysis.
Showing how they illustrate those economic concepts.
And you always want to connect it back to the theory.
Right, theory and reality.
Exactly.
Okay, now what about the key concept itself?
Also 3 marks.
Okay.
This is all about choosing the right concept to frame your whole analysis.
And remembering to use a different one for each commentary.
Can't emphasize that enough.
Right, so it's not enough to just mention it in passing.
Nope.
You got to weave it throughout the whole thing.
It's the lens through which you're viewing the entire commentary.
I like that.
Okay, now evaluation.
This is where we get to give our opinion.
Sort of.
Sort of.
It's more than just saying, I think this is good or bad.
Okay.
It's about using economic reasoning to make judgments.
So backing up our opinions with evidence.
Exactly.
Fair.
And this one's worth 4 marks.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is one of the sources I read suggested spending 2 or 3 paragraphs on this section.
That makes sense. It's almost a third of the marks.
Right. So how do we make sure our evaluation is strong?
Yeah, what are some strategies?
Well, think about the impact on different stakeholders.
Okay.
Like who benefits, who gets hurt.
Right, because it's not always obvious.
Then why?
Right, there's always a reason.
You also want to think about the short-term versus the long-term effects.
Yeah, sometimes what seems like a good idea now
Right.
could have negative consequences later on.
Or the other way around.
And don't forget about those underlying assumptions.
Ah, yes. Questioning those assumptions. That's where you can really show some sophisticated thinking.
So we're thinking critically about the theory itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so that covers the individual commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a criterion that applies to the whole portfolio.
All right. Rubric requirements.
3 marks.
And this is all about the details.
Okay, like what kind of details?
Word count.
Right, it's got to stand under that 800-word limit. Referencing.
Got to cite our sources.
Cover sheet, making sure each commentary is from a different source and covers a different section of the syllabus.
So basically organization and clarity.
And following the rules.
Right. Those little things matter.
Those 3 marks can make a difference.
Okay. So before we move on to some examples,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on something that came up in a few of the sources.
Okay.
AI.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one these days.
It is. And with all these new AI tools out there, it can be tempting to think, oh, I can just let the AI write my commentary for me.
Right. But that's not the point of the IA. No, the whole point is to show what you know.
Exactly. To show that you can think like an economist.
So where does AI fit in?
I think it can be helpful for brainstorming,
Okay.
for researching, maybe even for editing your writing.
Okay.
But the core analysis, the evaluation that has to come from you.
Right. So use AI responsibly
Absolutely.
and always check your school's policies
Yes,
and the IEB's policies.
because they might have specific rules about using AI.
Okay, so now that we've covered the criteria and talked about AI, let's look at some real-life examples
Okay.
of high-scoring commentaries.
I love this part.
Me too, because we can see what actually works.
Exactly. What did these top students do to get those 7s?
Let's find out.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so we've talked about all the criteria, the requirements, but now I want to see it in action.
Yeah, let's see how it all comes together.
You said we have some examples of commentaries that actually got a 7,
We do.
highest mark.
Yep. The top score.
Let's break those down.
All right, so we've got one for each section of the syllabus,
Okay,
micro, macro, and global.
perfect.
And when you read through these, you start to see patterns.
Oh, interesting. Like what kind of patterns?
Things that these top students did really well.
Okay, I'm ready to learn from the best.
Let's start with the microeconomics commentary.
Okay,
This one was about a sugar tax on soft drinks in the UK.
interesting.
The first thing that jumped out at me was just how clear and structured the analysis was.
Okay.
So they started by summarizing the article,
Well, you've got to set the scene.
but they did it concisely,
Right.
no wasted words.
Right.
And then they clearly stated the key economic concept.
So the examiner knows exactly what they're focusing on.
Exactly. In this case, it was negative externalities of consumption.
Okay.
And then they had this really clear thesis statement.
Oh, like a roadmap for the whole commentary.
Exactly. Keeps everything focused and on point.
I like that.
And they didn't just throw around economic jargon.
Right.
They explained how that concept applied to sugar consumption. Okay. They even gave real-world examples of the costs to society.
Like healthcare expenses for diabetes.
Exactly. They really showed they understood the concept in depth.
Not just a surface level understanding.
And they were really good at using evidence from the article.
Oh, so they're backing up their points.
Exactly. They used quotes, they used data points,
Okay.
and they made sure to link it all back to the economic theories.
So it's all connected.
Plus, they had 2 really nice hand-drawn diagrams,
Of course, got to have those diagrams.
clearly labeled, showing how that sugar tax would shift the supply and demand curves.
So they're showing and explaining.
Exactly.
Now, what about the evaluation?
Oh, the evaluation was really good.
But,
They didn't just say the sugar tax is good or bad.
right.
They looked at both sides.
Okay.
They analyzed the impact on different stakeholders.
So like the consumers, the producers, the government.
Exactly. They considered everyone.
Okay.
And they talked about the long run versus the short run implications.
Right, because sometimes a policy can have different effects over time.
Exactly, like they pointed out that the tax might lead to higher prices in the short term,
Okay.
but it could also improve public health and lower healthcare costs in the long run.
That's a really good point.
It's that kind of nuanced thinking that shows a deep understanding.
Okay, so let's move on to the macroeconomics commentary.
All right, this one was about rising interest rates and the housing market in Australia.
Oh, that's interesting. A very real-world issue.
This student did a fantastic job of linking everything back to monetary policy
Okay.
and how it affects aggregate demand.
So they started with the big picture.
Exactly. They explained how higher interest rates make it more expensive to borrow money,
Okay.
which then affects demand for housing.
Right, because if you can't afford a mortgage.
Exactly. And that leads to lower housing prices.
So they created this clear chain of reasoning.
Yeah, it was really easy to follow.
Okay, and the diagrams.
Top notch.
Okay.
They used an AD-AS diagram.
Aggregate demand and aggregate supply.
Yep, to show the overall impact on the economy.
Okay.
And then they zoomed in
Oh, cool.
with a separate supply and demand diagram just for the housing market.
So they showed both the big picture and the specific market.
Exactly. And their evaluation was excellent.
What did they focus on?
Well, they looked at all the different stakeholders affected by rising interest rates.
So like homeowners, potential buyers.
Builders, banks.
Wow. They really thought about everyone.
And they even talked about the long-term consequences for the whole economy.
Like economic growth and inflation.
Exactly. They really dug deep.
Okay, so the last one, the global economics commentary.
All right, this one was about trade tensions between the U.S. and China.
Oh, wow. That's a big one.
It is a complex issue.
Yeah, for sure.
But this student did an amazing job of breaking it down.
Right.
They clearly explained all the key concepts.
It's like tariffs and protectionism.
Exactly. And they used a really clever analogy to explain comparative advantage.
Oh, I love a good analogy.
So they compared it to 2 people. One is really good at baking cakes,
Okay, I'm following.
and the other one is really good at building furniture.
Yeah.
And they said even if one person could technically do both,
Yeah.
it makes more sense for them to specialize
Right. Focus on what they're good at.
and then trade.
So everyone gets cake and furniture.
Exactly. It was such a clear way to explain a complex concept.
I love that.
And this student didn't just stop at the direct effects of the trade tensions.
Okay.
They talked about the wider global implications.
Like what kind of implications?
The impact on supply chains, investor confidence, even the possibility of a global recession.
Wow. So they really zoomed out to see the big picture.
And their evaluation was so insightful.
Okay.
They looked at both sides of the argument.
So like the pros and cons of protectionism.
Exactly. They talked about how it can protect domestic industries,
Right.
but it can also hurt consumers.
And the overall economy.
Right. It's all about finding that balance.
Okay, so what can we learn from these amazing examples?
I think the biggest takeaway is don't be scared of the IA.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
But it's also an opportunity.
Right, a chance to really explore something you're interested in.
And as we've seen, you can definitely get a 7.
So don't be afraid to challenge yourself.
Absolutely.
Choose an article that you're genuinely excited about.
And make sure it has lots of details and data.
And don't be afraid to be creative.
Yes, use analogies, use examples, make it interesting.
The most important thing is to show what you know.
Analyze, evaluate, think critically, connect those dots.
Theory and practice.
Exactly.
And don't forget those little details.
Word count, referencing, formatting.
All that good stuff.
It all matters.
But I'm feeling inspired.
Me too.
The IA might be tough,
Yeah.
but it's also a chance to show off your skills.
To really dig deep into economics.
So to everyone listening out there, good luck with your IAs.
Yeah, good luck.
Choose your articles wisely.
Dive deep.
Don't be afraid to think big.
And remember, the world needs good economists.
That's a great point to end on.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening to this deep dive into the IB Economics IA.
Until next time.
See you later.